Eventually, the Chinese and Indians will exert little influence at the polling booths. When that day comes with no votes to bargain with, the Chinese and Indians cannot hope to bring about a fair and equal society for themselves. In the aftermath of the 2008 general election, there was a strong sense among some quarters in Malaysia that the country was on the verge of real change. An opposition that campaigned officially on, among other things, promises to do away with some of the country's race-based policies, surprised even its own supporters with the result it got. In terms of votes, it was the opposition's best result since 1969. In terms of seats, it was its best result ever. The government was denied a two-thirds majority. A year after the election, Najib Tun Razak took over as Prime Minister. He then launched a campaign called One Malaysia to strengthen racial harmony and national unity. Prime Minister Najib proposed One Malaysia because he wanted to win back some of the Chinese and Indian votes that his party lost in 2008 election. But has the ground moved with him? Has there been thunderous applause from the Malays at the One Malaysia? It may have been that he started out with ambitious plans, but it appears that political realities may have conscribed his subsequent actions. It is impossible for him to win votes from the Chinese and Indians without losing votes from his party's core supporters, the Malays. The One Malaysia slogan has not lived up to the initial excitement it created. When I met with the Malaysian Chinese press shortly after its launch, they said they had initially reported it as One Multiracial Malaysia, but were later corrected to report it as simply One Malaysia. In other words, the people share one Malaysia, but the communities remain distinct as Malays, Chinese, and Indians. It still remains to be seen if the campaign can level the playing field for non-Bumiputras in any significant way. If those counting on One Malaysia to usher in a new era for race relations are being unrealistic, those counting on the opposition to do the same someday are not very much less so. To begin with, the opposition coalition coming to power in the near future is a very long shot indeed. But even if it were to happen, chances of it getting rid of Malay special treatment are next to nothing. To understand this, one has to examine closely the Pakatan Rakyat coalition. This is an opportunistic ad hoc group not held together by even a vaguely coherent set of ideas, but by a common desire to unseat the government. As long as it does not actually hold the reins of the federal government and therefore does not have to implement the state multiracial policies, some semblance of unity can be maintained. When it comes to the crunch, however, the PR will not be able to do away with Malay supremacy. The moment the bluff is called and it is handed the full power to push ahead, it will either be torn apart from within or be paralyzed by indecision. If it attempts to move in any meaningful way past a Malay Muslim party that will hold, if not a majority of seats within the coalition, then at least a significant enough share to give it veto power, would block action in an instant. In doing so, the past would be responding to the same electoral pressures that UMNO faces from the Malay ground. Whether or not UMNO or Barisan Nasional can cling on to power, therefore, is not the critical issue if one is to make sense of the entrenchment of Malay privileges. Instead of thinking of UMNO as the entity that will remain in power, I think of the Malays as the bloc that will always control the majority of seats. Any party that takes the place of UMNO and becomes the main party representing Malay interests will not act very differently from UMNO. There are issues other than race on which Singapore and Malaysia differ. But over the years we have learned to live and let live. We accept that we are different. When we separated from Malaysia in 1965, English was the language common to both countries. Some years after that, Malaysia decided to drop English and teach all subjects in Malay, making it a working language, the working language. The Chinese privately financed their own schools. When the government concluded that it was a disadvantage to lose English, they reintroduced English for the teaching of science and maths in 2003. But there was opposition from the Malays, especially from the rural areas, and the language medium for science and maths switched back to Malay in 2009. And the decision to drop English was not easily reversible. In Singapore, we have also maintained the independence of the judiciary bequeathed to us by the British. In Malaysia, in 1988, the government responded to unfavorable court judgments with a series of decisions that included the sacking of a Chief Justice and other senior judges, as well as an amendment to the Constitution to weaken the judiciary. 20 years later, the government led by Prime Minister Abdullah Badawi made ex gratia payments to the sacked judges and their families. By Prime Minister Abdullah Badawi's own admission, the events of 1988 marked a time of crisis from which the nation never fully recovered. Singapore and Malaysia have chosen two entirely different ways of organizing our societies. But we have each come to the understanding that there is no need to try to influence the other to your own point of view. We cannot change them. They cannot change us. We just coexist separately but amicably. What is important for Singapore is that we develop and maintain a strong military force to protect our sovereignty. As long as we have a Singapore armed forces capable of fending off an aggressor, we will be left alone. In retrospect, would you say that you pushed too hard on Malaysia? No, I had not pushed then. If I had not pushed then, we would be prisoners now. You have said that in the past that there were those around you who told you that merger would not work, including Mrs. Lee. You once said, "She told me that we will not succeed in Malaysia because the UMNO Malay leaders had such different lifestyles and because their politics were communally based on race and religion." I replied that we had to make it work as there was no better choice. But she was right. We were asked to leave Malaysia before 2 years. Yes, but I had to give it a chance. What were the other options then for Singapore? Well, an independent Singapore, which at the time would be facing the Chinese